Have you ever cried out for help, only to have the very people you raised turn their backs on you? That was me. I wasn't just ignored. I was mocked, silenced, and treated like I didn't matter. But let me tell you, I mattered more than they realized. And they found that out the hard way. Hello, my name is Lorraine Harris. I'm 72 years old. Before I dive into my story, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from? I'd love to know if you're listening from a warm kitchen like mine, or maybe from your living room after a long day. Wherever you are, I want you to sit with me for a while, because what I'm about to share isn't just about money. It's about betrayal, dignity, and what happens when you finally stand up for yourself, even if it means standing alone. I've lived what most people would call a modest but good life. I grew up in a working class family, learned the value of every dollar, and built my life alongside my late husband, Richard. He passed 8 years ago, and since then, I've tried to hold on to the lessons he left me. Lorraine, he'd say, always keep your independence no matter how old you get. Don't let anyone take it from you. I didn't realize just how much those words would come back to me. After Richard died, my world got smaller. My children had their own families, their own jobs, their own worries, and I didn't expect to be at the center of their lives, but I did expect at least their respect. What I got instead was neglect, followed by something much worse. I live on a small pension and some savings, and I've always been careful. My credit card was something I reserved for emergencies or the occasional treat. A nice dinner out, a birthday gift for a grandchild. Nothing extravagant. But one afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table, sorting through bills, when I noticed something odd. A charge I didn't recognize. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake. A restaurant I hadn't been to, a store I hadn't shopped at. It was small, easy to brush off. But then it happened again, and again. Each month, the charges grew bolder. Airline tickets, hotel bookings, restaurants in cities I'd never visited. I remember holding the statement in my hands, my chest tightening as I whispered out loud, "How? How is this happening?" My first thought was fraud, of course. Some stranger had gotten hold of my card. But then I saw the names, the details, and my heart dropped. It was my son and his wife. I knew the exact resort they had stayed at because my daughter-in-law had bragged about it online. A beachfront villa, all-inclusive, champagne every night. And now, I realized, it had been paid for in my name. I tried to call them immediately. I must have dialed 6 times before someone picked up. When my son finally answered, his tone was sharp, almost annoyed. "Mum, you're confused again. You're always worrying about nothing. Don't stress. Yourself." He hung up before I could finish my sentence. I didn't give up, though. I sent messages in our family group chat. I explained that there were charges I didn't make, that I needed help. Do you know what I got back? Silence. And then, worse, a laughing emoji from my daughter-in-law, followed by the words, "She's losing it. Maybe we should take the card away before she spends it all on yarn and tea." I stared at that screen until my eyes blurred with tears. My pleas for help, blocked. My dignity, mocked. But let me tell you something. That was the moment the fire lit in me. Because they thought I was powerless. They thought they could drain me dry and laugh while I begged. They forgot that I was the one who had built the life they now stood on. I wasn't done yet. After that night, I barely slept. I kept replaying their words over and over again in my mind. The mocking tone, the dismissive brush-off, the laughing emoji that felt like a slap. I was sitting at my kitchen table, clutching the credit card statement like it was evidence of a crime. Because that's exactly what it was. A crime against me, their own mother. In the morning, I made myself a strong cup of coffee and went through every page, line by line. The more I read, the more my hands shook. Airline tickets to Florida. a five-star resort in Mexico, designer shopping sprees, spa treatments, fancy restaurants, thousands upon thousands of dollars, all under my name. My throat went dry. I remembered every year I had skipped buying new clothes, just so I could put aside a little more for them. Every Christmas, where I quietly cut back on my own meals so I could afford the toys my grandchildren wanted. And now, they were sipping cocktails on the beach while I was counting coins for groceries. I picked up the phone again, determined to get through to my son. This time, his wife answered. "Lorraine," she said sweetly, her voice dripping with false concern. "You must be mistaken. You know how complicated bills can look when you're older." Her words stung more than she realized. When you're older. As if age erased my ability to think. As if my mind, my sharpness, my dignity had already expired. "I'm not mistaken," I told her firmly. "I see the dates, I see the amounts, and I saw the photos you posted. Do not lie to me." She chuckled, low and cruel. "If you're so worried, maybe you shouldn't have given us access in the first place, but don't worry. We'll handle it. You just rest." Then the line went dead. I sat there for a long time, phone still in my hand, pulse pounding in my ears. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the way they looked at me, like I was disposable, like my role in their lives had been reduced to nothing more than an ATM machine they could draw from whenever they pleased. That evening, I tried again, but this time I reached out to my daughter. Maybe she would understand. Maybe she would step in. I poured my heart out over the phone, explained what was happening. There was silence on the other end, and then a sigh. "Mum, please don't drag me into this. You know how dramatic you can be." And that was it. That was all she said before she hung up. My heart broke in a way I can't describe. Betrayal doesn't always come with a loud crash. Sometimes it's quiet, like a door being shut in your face by the people you love most. For days, I carried that weight in silence. I didn't want to tell my neighbors. Pride held me back. I didn't want to confide in my church friends. Shame burned too deep. Instead, I wrote. I took every statement and highlighted the charges I didn't make. I started a notebook, writing dates, amounts, locations, and matching them with the posts my daughter-in-law flaunted online. I was building my case quietly, even though part of me still hoped it wouldn't come to that. But one evening, as I sat on the couch with the television buzzing faintly in the background, I remembered Richard's words again. "Always keep your independence." And I realized, independence wasn't just about living alone or paying your own bills. It was about not letting anyone silence you. The next day, I went to the bank. I remember how heavy the glass doors felt as I pushed them open, how the young teller smiled politely when I sat down at her desk. My voice shook as I explained, but I made myself clear. "I want this account frozen. Now." She hesitated, asking if I was sure. I nodded, my jaw set. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was breathing again. I had taken the first step, and I knew this was just the beginning. The silence after I froze the account didn't last long. 2 days later, my phone started ringing non-stop. At first, I thought it might be the bank confirming the freeze. But when I saw the name flashing on the screen, my stomach tightened. It was my son. I hesitated, then answered. "Mum, what the hell did you do?" His voice wasn't calm, wasn't worried. It was furious. I could hear the clamor of an airport in the background, announcements echoing. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Our vacation is ruined. The hotel wouldn't let us check in. Do you know how humiliating that is?" I sat in silence for a moment, stunned. Not a single word about the theft. Not an ounce of remorse. Just rage that their fun had been interrupted. "I froze my account," I said evenly, my voice steadier than I felt. "Because you used it without my permission. That's called stealing." There was a sharp laugh on the other end. "Stealing? We're your children. It's family money. What's yours is ours. You raised us, didn't you? Isn't this what parents do? Help their kids? Something in me snapped at those words. My whole life I had given. I had helped. I had carried them through storms, fed them when the pantry was bare, clothed them when money was tight, worked long hours while Richard struggled with his health. And now, they thought my sacrifices meant they had a permanent right to take. Before I could respond, my daughter-in-law's voice cut in. She must have grabbed the phone. "You're selfish, Lorraine. Selfish. We needed this trip. We deserve this. And you just had to ruin it because you're bitter and lonely. No wonder no one wants to be around you." Those words were sharper than knives. I sat frozen, the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the venom spill from her lips. And then, click, they hung up. That night, I cried harder than I had in years, not because of the money, though thousands were gone, not even because of the insults, but because I realized the truth. My children didn't see me as their mother anymore. They saw me as an obstacle, an inconvenience, a wallet they could open and close at will. But grief turned into resolve. The next morning, I laid every document on my kitchen table, pages and pages of bank statements with yellow highlighter marking the charges. I taped printouts of their vacation photos next to the corresponding transactions. I drew arrows, made notes, even stapled receipts from my own spending to show the difference. Looking at it, the evidence was undeniable. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't confusion. It was theft, plain and simple. I thought about calling them again, but what good would it do? They had already shown me who they were. So instead, I called someone else. The police. When the officer on the phone asked me to explain, I expected dismissal. I thought they'd tell me it was a family matter, something private. But as I walked them through the details, the officer's voice changed. Firm, serious. "Ma'am, what you're describing is elder financial abuse. And that's a crime. If you have the statements and records, bring them to the station. Elder financial abuse." I repeated the words in my mind like they were foreign. Abuse. I'd never wanted to think of my children that way, but now there was no escaping it. That's what it was. I hung up the phone and looked around my kitchen, the quiet hum of the fridge, the clock ticking on the wall. I realized I was standing at a crossroads. I could back down, let them bully me into silence, let them keep bleeding me dry. Or I could fight back, even if it meant tearing the family apart. And deep inside, I already knew my answer. When I zipped my folder shut that night, I whispered into the empty room, "I won't let you win. Not this time." The fire in me burned brighter than their laughter, stronger than their cruelty. They thought they'd broken me. They hadn't even seen me stand yet. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Fear was still there, heavy in my chest, but it wasn't running the show anymore. Determination was. I gathered everything. The folder thick with statements, my notebook filled with dates and notes, even a few screenshots of their smiling faces sipping wine on beaches I'd never seen. I got dressed carefully, choosing my navy cardigan, the one Richard always said made me look strong. Commanding, he used to tease. I needed that strength now. With my cane in one hand and the folder in the other, I walked out the door. The police station smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Young officers bustled around, typing at computers, answering calls. For a moment, I felt small, a tired old woman with papers clutched to her chest. But then a desk sergeant looked up and asked, "Can I help you, ma'am?" "Yes," I said, steadying my voice. "I need to report a crime. My children have been stealing from me." He blinked, clearly surprised, but he gestured for me to sit. Soon, a young officer with kind eyes led me into a smaller room. As I laid the documents across the table, I told my story piece by piece. My voice trembled at first, but then it grew stronger. Every word was a release of shame, of fear, of the weight I'd been carrying alone. The officer didn't interrupt, didn't dismiss me. Instead, he nodded, asked clarifying questions, and took notes. Finally, he leaned back, tapping the folder. "You've done more legwork than most cases we see. Mrs. Harris, this isn't just carelessness. This is elder financial abuse, and it's prosecutable." I felt my throat tighten. Hearing it put so plainly, it broke something in me, but it also built something new. "What happens now?" I asked quietly. "We'll need to contact them, review the charges with the bank, and open a formal investigation. You may need to give a statement in court if it goes that far. But you've already done the hardest part. You came forward." For the first time in weeks, I felt lighter, like maybe justice wasn't just for other people. Maybe it was for me, too. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. That very evening, my phone lit up again, this time with messages, not just calls. "How dare you involve the police? You're going to ruin us, Mom. Do you understand what you're doing? You're breaking up this family over nothing. Nothing!" I stared at the screen, my hand trembling. For a moment, I almost caved. Almost. But then I remembered every night I went to bed with an empty stomach so they could eat. Every Christmas morning where I gave them everything I had. Every sacrifice that had been twisted into entitlement. I typed one reply. Just one. "You broke this family when you stole from me." And I turned the phone face down. The days that followed were tense. I avoided the grocery store near their neighborhood. I kept my blinds drawn. I leaned on the support of a kind neighbor, Mrs. Turner, who brought me tea and squeezed my hand when the weight grew too much. But through it all, I held on to one truth. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I was right. Then came the summons. The police called me, back for a follow-up. They had spoken to my children. My son, they said, tried to laugh it off, insisting it was just family business. But the officer told me something that made my heart stir. He said it was family money. I told him, "Not when it's stolen." That line replayed in my mind all night like music. Finally, someone had said what I'd been screaming in silence. But I knew this was only the beginning. My children were angry, cornered. And cornered people don't always back down quietly. The storm was coming, and I was ready to face it. The summons to return to the station came quicker than I expected. The officer who had listened to me so patiently before now looked graver, sterner. He told me they had already interviewed my son and daughter-in-law. They hadn't denied using the card. No, they had tried to justify it. "They said you didn't need the money," he explained, his lips pressed thin. "That you were old, that it was better spent on them. They even suggested you'd forget about it eventually." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Forget? Was that what they thought of me now? A feeble old woman whose memory could be bent like clay? Who wouldn't notice thousands vanishing from her account? The officer must have seen my face harden because he leaned in. "Mrs. Harris, the law is on your side. This is a criminal matter, not just a family dispute. Don't let them convince you otherwise." Later that week, I agreed to meet them, not alone, never alone, but at the station with officers present. I walked into that stark room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and there they were, my son, arms crossed, jaw clenched, and his wife, looking defiant in her expensive blouse. The moment their eyes met mine, the accusations began. "How could you do this to us, Mom?" My son spat. "We're your family. You don't air dirty laundry to strangers. You've embarrassed us." Embarrassed. That was his word of choice. Not sorry. Not we were wrong. Embarrassed. I sat down slowly, folding my hands on the table. "You embarrassed yourselves when you treated my account like your personal piggy bank." My daughter-in-law rolled her eyes. Oh, please. You don't need that money. You sit alone in that house, knitting sweaters and drinking tea. We have kids, responsibilities, stress. We deserved that vacation. And what do you even spend on, Lorraine? More yarn? Her laughter rang in the small room, sharp and cruel. For a moment, shame flared hot in my chest. Then, just as quickly, it turned to steel. Do you know what I spend it on? I said, my voice low but steady. On keeping the lights on my medications, on the little things that keep me alive day to day. And even if I didn't, even if I wanted to spend every cent on yarn, it would still be mine, not yours. The officer cleared his throat then, turning to them. Mrs. Harris is correct. Your use of her account, without permission, is theft, plain and simple. And when the victim is over 65, it's also classified as elder financial abuse under state law. That word again. Abuse. It hung in the air like smoke. My son's face drained of colour. My daughter-in-law opened her mouth to argue, but for once she had no words. Still, my son tried again, softer this time, almost pleading. Mum, think about what you're doing. Do you really want to drag us through court? To have your own family's name in the papers? People will talk. The neighbours, the church. Is that what you want? For everyone to whisper about us? I leaned forward. They're already whispering. And you know what they're saying? That you used me. That you stole from me. That you left me to cry alone in my kitchen while you sipped champagne on my credit. The shame isn't mine to carry. It's yours. The room went silent. For once, the power wasn't theirs. It was mine. When the meeting ended, I walked out taller than I'd felt in years. But I knew this wasn't over. They weren't going to give up without a fight. And neither was I. The war lines had been drawn, not just in my family but in my heart. And I was ready to see it through, no matter how ugly it got. The investigation moved slowly, as these things often do. But the whispers, they spread fast. It started at church. I usually sit near the back, quietly singing hymns, nodding at familiar faces. But one Sunday, I noticed the way people turned their heads when my son and his wife walked in. Conversations hushed, eyes lingered, and hands covered mouths. They walked stiffly, plastered smiles on their faces, but I could see the cracks. Later, Mrs. Turner from next door stopped by with her usual plate of cookies. She leaned in, lowering her voice. Lorraine, people are talking. They say your boy's in trouble over money. With you. I swallowed hard, embarrassed. But then she patted my hand. Don't you feel ashamed, dear? You did the right thing. More of us should have spoken up when our children thought they could take advantage. Her words warmed me more than the cookies ever could. But for my son and his wife, the walls were closing in. They called constantly, switching between fury and desperation. You're ruining us, my son shouted one night. The neighbours think we're criminals. My boss pulled me aside at work. Do you understand what this is doing to me? I almost laughed at the absurdity. What it was doing to him. As though I hadn't been the one drained, dismissed, mocked. His wife tried a different angle. Lorraine, she said in a syrupy tone, we're family. Families forgive. You don't want to end up all alone in that house, do you? I let the silence hang heavy before replying. I'd rather be alone in my house than used in yours. But what shook me most wasn't their anger. It was a quiet knock on my door late one evening. When I opened it, there stood my granddaughter, Emily, 16 years old, with her mother's eyes but a softer expression. She looked nervous, shifting from foot to foot. Grandma, she whispered, can I come in? I made her tea, the way I always do, and waited. Finally she spoke. I knew about the card. I saw Mom and Dad booking the trips. I didn't say anything because I was scared. They said it was normal, that you'd never notice. But when you froze it, and the police called, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Her eyes brimmed with tears. I'm sorry, Grandma. I should have told you sooner. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. My heart broke for her, caught between loyalty to her parents and the truth she knew was wrong. You're here now, I said softly. That takes courage. More courage than most adults I know. She nodded, then pulled something from her backpack, printed screenshots, messages between her parents, laughing about how easy it was to use my card, mocking me for not noticing sooner. Maybe this will help, she whispered. My hands trembled as I took them. The words on those pages weren't just damning, they were cruel. They joked about how I'd probably forget by morning, about how they'd keep draining the old lady dry until the bank cut her off. Seeing it in writing was like a knife to the chest, but it was also the final piece I needed. The next morning, I added those screenshots to my folder and called the officer. His tone grew sharper when he realized what Emily had brought. This strengthens the case, Mrs. Harris. Thank you. It makes their intent clear. Intent. That was the word that changed everything. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't confusion. It was deliberate. And as much as it shattered me to admit, my children hadn't just abandoned me. They had plotted against me. From that moment, the tide turned. The whispers in town grew louder. Their friends pulled away. My son's boss. I later heard he was suspended at work pending the investigation. And all the while, I stayed quiet in my home, hands folded around my teacup, waiting. Waiting for justice to do what family would not. The day of the hearing felt surreal. I sat in the courthouse lobby, my folder of evidence resting on my lap like an anchor. Around me, families shuffled papers, whispered to lawyers, or fidgeted nervously. When my name was called, I rose slowly, leaning on my cane, and walked into that room with every ounce of dignity I had left. Across the aisle sat my son and his wife. They didn't look so polished now. Their clothes were neat, yes, but their faces were tight, drawn. My son avoided my gaze. My daughter-in-law, however, glared at me like I was the villain in her story. The judge listened patiently as the officer presented the evidence, the statements, the highlighted charges, the screenshots Emily had given me. Each page felt like reopening a wound, but I kept my chin high. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath and rose. My voice wasn't loud, but it was steady. I am not here out of spite, I said, my eyes fixed on the judge. I am here because I gave my children everything, my time, my money, my love. And in return, they treated me like I was nothing more than a credit card with a pulse. This isn't just about dollars. It's about dignity. And I refuse to be erased in my own family. The judge's expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Respect, perhaps. When my son was asked to respond, he muttered about family matters and misunderstandings. My daughter-in-law tried to paint me as confused, incapable, but the judge cut her off sharply. The evidence is clear. This was intentional misuse of funds. Mrs. Harris's age makes it an aggravated offence. This court does not tolerate elder financial abuse. The gavel struck. Just like that, it was over. Sanctions were ordered, restitution demanded, and the stain of a criminal record marked against them. They wouldn't be able to shrug this off as a misunderstanding anymore. The whispers in town would now be truths carved into official record. I walked out of that courthouse with my head high, not victorious in the way of triumph, but in the way of survival. I had stood up for myself. I had used the voice they tried to silence, and I had been heard. That night, I sat in my kitchen, a cup of chamomile tea warming my hands. The house was quiet, but it wasn't the heavy silence of betrayal anymore. It was peace. Emily called me to check in, her voice soft but sure. "I'm proud of you, Grandma," she said. And for the first time in a long while, I felt proud of myself too. As I looked at the stack of papers now tucked away in a drawer, I thought of Richard. I imagined him standing there, arms folded, that little grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Commanding, he would have said again. And I realized he was right. I may have been 72. I may have been dismissed, mocked, ignored. But I was not powerless. And to anyone listening right now, maybe you've felt the same. Maybe you've been silenced, overlooked, treated like you don't matter. Let me tell you, you do matter. Your voice matters. Your dignity matters. And sometimes you have to fight for it, even if it means standing alone. My children thought they could block my pleas for help. They thought they could laugh while draining me dry. What they didn't know was that I still had fight left in me. I froze their access. I showed the police the truth. And in the end, I got my dignity back. So I'll leave you with this. Never let anyone convince you you're too old to stand up for yourself. Age doesn't erase your strength. It sharpens it. Now tell me, where are you watching from? I want to know. Because maybe, just maybe, my story is your story too.